Hi, good afternoon, everybody. This is Kaihu from Accelerate, and welcome to the webinar. So today, we are very pleased to co-host a webinar with Antler, and their startup founders represented by Apoorv and Nayu. So Antler is a venture builder that runs a number of programs, venture programs every year. And their focus really is to look out and seek out great entrepreneurs, potential entrepreneurs, and then pair them with co-founders in the venture program. So today, we'll be very pleased to actually share with you how to build a deep tech startup from a researcher's perspective. So with that, I'll pass the stage over to Dimitri.
Great, thank you so much, Heiko, and welcome everyone to this webinar that we're co-hosting with A Star. And thank you also to Apoorv and Nayu for joining. And again, welcome to everyone. We will basically be going through a short presentation about Antler, what we do and why we do it, and how our program works. And then after about 15 minutes, we're going to go into a panel discussion with Apoorv and Nayu. I'm going to be asking them some questions that maybe are in many of your minds in terms of how do you start basically this journey as a researcher, how do you go over to the entrepreneurship side. And then in the meantime, you can also ask any questions you wish in the Q&A chat. And then we'll go through these questions together at the end of the panel discussion. And your questions could be about Antler and the programs, and or about Apoorv and Nayu and their experiences. So, unfortunately, we cannot make this a very interactive session due to the circumstances, but let's try our best to make it as interactive as possible with many questions coming over from you. So with that said, let me share my screen. Maybe someone can confirm that you can see my screen.
Yes, can. Okay,
great. So just a little bit about introductions. Mike Nipu is one of our global partners with Antler. He will join us a bit later because he had a very important fundraising call. This is actually his job, to raise investments from a large institutional investors, so that Antler has money to invest in your startups. I'm also accompanied today by Punita, who is the program manager for the executive program, and we'll be tackling the questions that you're going to be sending later together. In terms of myself, a little bit of the background, I'm actually very glad to be among this crowd of PhDs and researchers, because this is also where I started about 16 years ago. I actually started a PhD in the US, in the University of Michigan, and at the same time I was working as a researcher in the lab, commercializing and advancing a renewable energy technology, which was based on a very advanced technology of vortex-induced vibrations. If the term deep tech was in existence at the time, I think that would have been a deep tech startup, but the term deep tech was coined much later, I believe, in 2014. Anyway, so I did not complete my PhD. Unfortunately, I did not have that persistence, I guess. I went back to the industry, and I worked for a few years in the energy sector, did an MBA in 2012, and then I crossed over to the dark side of business, because in the first few years of my career, I was an engineer, basically. After 2012, I had a few roles. I worked with operational excellence with BP, a large oil company. I worked with McKinsey in their turnaround and digital transformation practice, basically helping large companies improve themselves in terms of profitability. And I also worked for a large tech company, Oracle, selling enterprise software B2B. I joined Antler about a couple of years ago. So, you can see I started from startup, and then I went over to large corporations, and now I'm back to the startup world, which is amazing. And this is always what I wanted to do. I joined Antler because I believe in our mission of helping very successful and aspiring and ambitious people who want to build their own company and basically have impact through this company and change the world for the better. So this is why I joined, and for the last couple of years, I'm responsible for assessing the talent that comes into our programs, coaching startups, and I'm really very interested and passionate about anything deep tech, but also B2B startups typically. I'm part of the investment committee, and I'm always trying, as the other partners here in Singapore, to help our startups, coach, advise them, and connect them with other advisors and investors so that they can continue their successful journey. So that's about myself. Quite diverse background, I guess. So about Antler. Antler is basically a venture capital firm that invests in early stage startups, technology startups, right? We're looking for individuals that join our programs, and in these programs, venture building, you could call them, we help you find a co-founder, identify and validate the business idea and technology, and then once you pitch at our investment committee, we decide to invest in some of these companies. So, you could see us as Y Combinator, but we're even earlier stage, right? We start even earlier, pre-team, pre-idea. So that means that individuals who do not have a business idea and do not have a co-founder and a team can join our programs without a team and without an idea. We started about a couple of years ago in Singapore. Singapore is our headquarters. And since then, we have expanded to 14 locations all over the world. We're in 4 continents now. We have supported more than 1,500 entrepreneurs so far, made more than 200 investments, and we're receiving about 50,000 applications every year from people that want to start their own company through Antler. Our founder is Magnus Grimeland, who many of you may know. He used to be one of the co-founders of Zalora. And then we also have Stefan Jung, who is our Chief Investment Officer, very well-known venture capitalist in Southeast Asia, and has invested his previous roles in some of the unicorns that I'm sure we all know in this region in Southeast Asia. At the same time, our leadership team has also many other experienced entrepreneurs and investors. So, people who have actually been there and done this themselves. We're supported, as I said earlier, by a really large and extensive network of advisors. These are people who are experts in what they do, and about 500 of them now all over the world in all different types of sectors and disciplines and technologies, which means that these people help the startups and the founders by mentoring them, and they tend to be very useful. And just because Antler is sector agnostic, we do not have a particular focus in any specific sector in terms of our investments. That means that whatever you're building in Antler, there's always going to be someone in our network who can help you, advise you, and open some doors for you even, right? These are some examples of founders that we are honored to have been through our programs. We have typically 3 categories of people, right? People who are tech and product experts, people who can build a product and a technology, people who bring a specific intellectual property, if you will, into the program. Then we have the second category, people with extensive experience in business and commercial experience, typically. And then domain experts. For example, you can see Monica, and other people that have been through our programs. They may have a spike or a domain expertise in a certain function or in a certain industry or in a certain domain. Like, for Monica, this was immunotherapy. That's where her PhD was at. Typical years of experience is about 10, although we've had founders join our programs anywhere from 2 years of experience up to 20 plus. These are some of the companies that we're very proud have been created here in the Antler program. You can see the first location, Southeast Asia, typically has more companies because we started first, and then others are following in Australia, Europe, and the US. These companies, we have been actively helping to fundraise after they leave the Antler program from large institutional investors and VCs. Like Sequoia and Founders Fund and many other of the global and also regional VCs. These are, I think, some of the investments that we have done in the deep tech space. I guess deep tech is a very abused term, I would say sometimes. So we'll go into that discussion later with Apoorv and Nayu about what really deep tech means. But if we include deep tech and deep tech enabled companies, these are just some of the examples that have been created in our programs. You can see Chloropy. Apoorv is one of the co-founders, and he will talk a little bit more about what they do later. We've had Zelf AI, it's basically a digital health intervention platform enabled by machine learning that has been started by Monica, the lady I showed you earlier, and her co-founder Viraj. We had some other companies in the machine learning space, AI, robotics. We had, for example, Skycraft I think in Stockholm, basically using drones to inspect infrastructure, basically, and electricity cables mainly. A few other AI companies like Zillion in Australia, and some other biotech companies as well, like PBA and Biogenes, very much related also to COVID, to the COVID pandemic, and helping solve this problem. Moving on, I just wanted to spend a minute basically talking about why we exist, right? I talked about Antler and what we do in a nutshell, but I think what problem are we solving? Why are we there, right? If you speak with early stage entrepreneurs, you typically hear that their main problems are three, right? There's others as well, but these are the three top ones. The first one is that there's no market need. That means that basically you're building something that nobody wants to buy. Second one is you're running out of cash very soon. And the third one is that you don't have the right team in place. Or maybe you have the right team, but there's, in terms of skills, but there's a lot of the wrong dynamics, let's say, in the team, right? And the team breaks up. And basically, that's why we exist. These are the problems we're solving. We have an established process to basically help you validate a business idea and technology, the first phase of our program. We invest in your startup, and we also make sure that, well, we don't make sure, but we're doing our best to help you fundraise from other investors after the Antler program. And we're also vetting and getting into our program the best of the best, right? So that means that as a, let's say, technology specialist or researcher, you can come into our program and find an amazing business commercial founder and pair up with them to start your company. This is what we have been doing for the last couple of years all over the world. In the process of speaking with so many people, we have actually discovered that there's a couple more problems that typically people have, right? And that is mainly that some people have a full-time job and they're just too risk-averse at that point. Maybe they have financial commitments, they have a family, and they're just too risk-averse to basically quit their job and go into something so uncertain and so unknown, right? That means starting a business without even having a team and without even having a business idea and some investment in place. So what we did about this is that we started this executive program, which is what we're talking about today, that basically enables you to test the waters in the first 3 months without really needing to quit your job. So you can do this part-time in phase 1. So let me just explain a little bit about how this program works. You basically go through a rigorous interview process and you get into our program. The first 8 days are full-time, so you'll have to take, together with a couple of weekends, you have to take some time, 3-4 days off work. And then after that, for the next 3 months or so, we continue on a part-time basis. And in this phase 1, we help you form the team and build your team, find a co-founder, and find and validate a business idea. Now, at the end of these 3 months, you come and pitch at the Antler Investment Committee. And if we decide to invest, a pre-seed investment, that is, we will invest $75,000 US. And then for those teams that get the investment, you go into phase 2. At that point, at some point in the beginning of phase 2, you'll have to quit your job and become a full-time entrepreneur. So that we cannot negotiate. At the end of the day, we do believe that if you really to succeed, you have to be full-time committed. So you have to quit your job and then become a full-time entrepreneur. And in this phase 2, you continue building your product, getting more customers, and then we help connect you with other investors so you can raise the next round of investment. If I talk a little bit more about, I will double click now on this phase 1 and explain a little bit more about how it works. So, you can see the timeline now in terms of weeks. In the first 1 or 2 weeks, as I said, it's typically full-time. We do a lot of training sessions, so we train you about anything that has to do with startups and starting your own company. We do a lot of bootcamps where we put you in a team with other people and ask you to deliver something like a product, for example, or a pitch deck. And it's by working together with other people that you get to understand who can be a good co-founder for you, right? We don't do this through speed dating and other superficial things. We actually make you work together with other people. Then in the next few weeks, we do a lot of workshops and other bootcamps to help you come up with a business idea and sort of initiate that process. You continue to find and test different co-founders. And once you have basically found the right co-founder for you and you have basically jumped on a business idea that you really are passionate about, you need to build a prototype, and that can have many forms, right? Depending on the business, we can go into long discussions around what exactly this prototype can be. But the point is that you need to get some validation, right? You need some validation of the product, that the product actually works. So technical feasibility, if you will. And you also need to get some validation from customers. That means that customers will buy your product once it is ready. And this is basically all part-time, as I said earlier. And that's when you basically come at the end of this phase and you present to our investment committee. So moving on, what types of people we're looking for? As I said earlier, we're looking for business experts. I don't think there will be many of these in this audience, since this is co-hosted with A Star. So we're also looking for domain and technical experts. And these people can come from the industry, they can have domain expertise in, let's say, marketing or in healthcare or different sectors, and also can come from technical leaders from R&D institutions like A Star, like other universities and other R&D institutions, but also from the industry, also from tech companies typically. So this is who comes into our program and where we recruit from. A little bit about, I think this is the last slide, and then I'm going to stop talking. A little bit about the differences between the part-time program that we have and the full-time program that we have. So, as the name suggests, the first one is about up to 50% time commitment. So you can do this the first 3 months while you maintain your job. While the full-time program, you basically have to quit your job from the beginning and come into full-time. There's no other option. The next executive starts in September, so we're basically closing the applications next week. And if you're interested, you'll have to apply very, very soon. And the next full-time program starts in October. And a little bit about financial terms now. For the full-time program, we pay the participants about $6,000 within phase 1, because you don't have a job then. And many of these people also come from overseas, right? So we give them this small stipend to get by in the first 2.5 months. And the investment is $60,000. If you're successful through the investment committee, you'll get an investment of $60,000 US. For the executive cohort, because we're doing it with people that are working and have a job, and to make sure that whoever joins this program is committed enough to build a company, and they're not just doing this for training, we are asking the participants to pay a small fee of $2,500 for the whole program. We have ongoing discussions with A Star regarding some other collaborations, and that's why we're giving a big discount to anyone from A Star. So the fee for A Star staff would actually be $1,500, not $2,500. But the investment is also higher; it's $75,000 US. And this one-time commitment fee, we do return it if you get investment from Antler. We're not really interested in this fee. It's a very small fee. The reason we do it is to have another, let's say, filter to make sure that whoever joins is committed enough. So with that said, I think you can start asking questions in the Q&A chat. You can scan the QR links that you see here. If you want to find out more about our program, you can scan this QR code. And if you want to book a coffee chat with someone from our team and know more about the program in a one-on-one basis, which can be virtual, of course, you have to follow this link and this QR code. So I'm just going to leave this on the screen for a few seconds. And then I'll proceed to the next topic, which is basically the panel discussion with Apoorv and Nayu. So Apoorv is he's the co-founder and CTO, Chief Technology Officer of Chloropy. Chloropy is an agri-tech startup that's basically helping agrochemical companies collect and manage data from the farms using drones and computer vision. Nayu is currently in our executive program. She's with A Star, and she's also part of the first executive program that we did together with NUS. She's basically commercializing NUS, National University of Singapore, IP, which is around lung cancer diagnosis with liquid biopsy. And that's basically the startup that she's building with the Antler program, the Antler NUS program, while still being with A Star. Let me move on and stop sharing my screen at this point and welcome Apoorv and Nayu to the panel. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, perfectly. Thank you so much, Dimitri, for the introduction.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. Yes, we can hear you well.
Great, thank you. Thanks, and really good to see you again. I just wanted to start basically by asking you, maybe we can start with Apoorv. What's your journey? What did you used to do before, and how did you make the transition? You used to be a researcher at SUTD, right? How did you make that transition to being an entrepreneur, actually?
Right.
And what are you currently building? If you can also tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. I'll just go from the beginning, just chronologically. So I was basically trained as a mechanical engineer, and I was always interested in building robots on 3D printers. I came out of India for the first time to Singapore, and I was working at SUTD as a researcher, building underwater robots and so forth. Briefly, I was also working with A Star at EDDC for a while, like collaborating on some project. But primarily especially during that time, I had some friends in the startup ecosystem in Singapore who were basically also researchers and had already made the transition. And I could see that they weren't just focusing on the niche day-to-day, improving the tech, squeezing out 2% efficiency, but they were actually building products and also selling them, taking feedbacks, raising money, and doing everything around that small piece of tech as well. And I was really interested in doing that, actually not being in a bubble in a research lab, but seeing the tech all throughout the journey from the start to end. And a bit about Chloropy. So earlier, like I mentioned, I was interested more in building the robots, the hardware side, but slowly I tried to transition to the software end because that's what I realized I enjoy more. So I took some time to just read a lot about startups. Also, I was doing a lot of exploratory research, basically research that is still this long time for commercialization, few years, few decades even. But then I took 6 to 12 months roughly on really focusing on research, which I know can be commercialized at this moment, and just building up my skills before. And at that time, I didn't know anything about Antler actually. So I took that 1 year off, not off, I was working as a researcher and slightly closer to commercialization technology as a researcher in Europe.
Okay. Thanks for sharing. Nayu, over to you.
Hi,
Same
everyone.
question.
Yeah, hi, everyone. My name is Nayu. So I have a PhD in biological science. So I did my PhD in GIS under the A Star scholarship. And after that, I moved over to do my postdoctoral studies in Duke and US Medical School. So my long-term career goal is actually, I want to pursue something that I'm really passionate about, and I want to create an impact in what I do. So I decided not to follow the academic career path, and I crossed over again, like Dimitri, I crossed over to the dark side. I joined a pharmaceutical industry, Novartis Institute of Tropical Diseases, so as an investigator. So it wasn't very long the stint there because Novartis decided to relocate to the US, and I came back to A Star and take on a project manager role. So in that role, I interacted with a lot of startups, and that inspired me to want to start my own company as well. But I didn't know how to start and where to start, and basically I've got zero knowledge on the business. So I know that I'm not qualified to start a business, and I didn't know about accelerator program back then. I decided to do an MBA. So during my MBA journey, I'm more convinced that I want to be an entrepreneur. So in fact, I started a business with my MBA classmate when we were in the UK. And it was on a business around sustainability. So, but along the way, it didn't go very well. We pivoted. He brought in a new co-founder, which I'm not comfortable with. And I decided not to continue with the business. And I quit. And I joined, and I told myself that I want to do something that I'm really passionate about in a space where I have the expertise in, so a biotech startup. And it so happens that, I came across this executive deep tech program. So Dimitri, you reached out to me and invited me to join. And yeah, it came at the right time. And I just joined this program. And this is where I'm now a founder of this program. So right now I'm building this diagnostic kit for early cancer detection. And this is an area that I'm very passionate about because of personal experience. My grandma passed away last year of breast cancer, and she was diagnosed at stage 4. So basically there's very little what the doctor can do, and she passed on very quickly after that. So I want to build something in this space, and to prevent death due to late diagnosis of cancer. Yep.
Great. Thank you, Nayu. Very inspiring. I think since we're talking about deep tech, and since the title of this webinar is deep tech and how to build a deep tech startup, maybe I get your views on what does deep tech mean, right? Everyone seems to be using the term in a different way. So what does it mean for you? Maybe Nayu, you continue since you were talking already.
So I guess deep tech is to use technologies, probably very cutting edge and innovative technology to provide a solution to a problem. So yeah, that's my definition of deep tech.
Yeah. Apoorv.
Right. So yeah, like you mentioned in the beginning, I think deep tech is like a really broad term which people use in a very different way. For me, the definition is actually, as a researcher, I understand in a different way. Basically, the research can be like very exploratory research that is like 20 years ahead of its time. It doesn't make economic sense right now. But then there's like over the course of that research, there'll be some time when it kind of makes sense in the last 2, 3 to 5 years when it maybe economically that technology makes sense. It's developed enough, it's efficient enough. And bringing that to commercialization stage, I think that to me is deep tech.
Okay. And I guess you're both talking about because Nayu, you mentioned cutting edge technologies, and Apoorv, you mentioned, technologies coming from research. That typically means technologies that are defensible, right? So if you develop them, you have a patent, you basically have a very strong advantage in the market because you'll be someone who will be taking advantage commercially of these technologies for a few years at least.
Totally.
That's right.
Good. The other question I had is, since you both had this experience being a scientist or researcher, what types of skills do you think you would you developed during this time of your life that are still useful now as an entrepreneur? Everyone has very diverse experiences, right? And everything that we do leaves a mark. We develop some muscles, some mental muscles for every job that we do, right? And I'm sure some of these muscles that you developed as researchers and scientists are still very useful. What are these for you, Apoorv?
So for me, as a CTO, I think a lot of what I do and from day to day, it's inspired from what I still keep myself updated with literature in the field of computer vision, which basically advances every 6 months, every 12 months, new conference. And there's a lot of ideas that I keep reading and I try to incorporate, which I really believe gives me an edge over my competitors, that I can bring this sort of ideas to commercialization faster. So that is one thing. And secondly, that's more focused to my company. That is, our customers are essentially researchers and corporate researchers, the R&D divisions of big agrochemical companies. So we understand how they think, what they need. Even my co-founder is a researcher, so we kind of know what our customers are looking for.
Yeah, good. Nayu?
For me, I think there are 3 skill sets which are very transferable from a researcher to an entrepreneur. So first is hard work, second is perseverance, and third is execution. So why hard work? You know, doing a PhD is really very hard work. So, you know, you spend long hours in the lab, you know, trying to get the experiment done, and of course, eventually to get a PhD. So long hours and for very little stipend, right? So, and this is what an entrepreneur would face as well. So, and perseverance, so, you know, experiments doesn't go well all the time. You always have to, you know, reiterate, you know, find the, you know, the most optimal condition to carry out the experiment. And this is the case for entrepreneurship. I think the journey is not a bed of roses. There's a lot of ups and downs, probably more downs than up, and you really need that perseverance, you know, and the drive to really overcome all the problems and not to give up very easily. And execution, and I think execution is really, really important. So, you know, as an entrepreneur, you can't just sit on an idea and overanalyze it. I mean, it's important to, you know, analyze the market, competition and stuff like that, but you really need to know how to execute, right? And when to execute. So, you know, create the MVP, you know, validate with your customer. And as a researcher, it's the same. So if you have a hypothesis, you have to test it out with the experiment. So that's execution. So yeah, these are the 3 main skill set, which I think is really transferable and still very useful now for me as an entrepreneur.
Great. Thank you so much, both. Very insightful. And I do agree with this last point. I think the whole, I've worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs in the Antler program in the last couple of years, and hundreds of, maybe more than 100 startups. And I think every startup needs to be seen as an experiment, right? And I think that's very common with the scientific method that we've all been taught. You know, you need to form a hypothesis and then basically find a way, design an experiment to test that hypothesis. And essentially, this is also what you do as an entrepreneur, I think. You form a hypothesis about the problem and how would a product solve this problem, or a technology would solve this problem. And then you have to basically build that prototype and test it out with customers, which is really an experiment, right? You don't know what the outcome will be. So yeah, I find this similarity fascinating between you know, science and entrepreneurship. Great. How about the Singapore ecosystem, guys? Do you think there's enough support for startuppers, for deep tech startups in Singapore? And how, and is something missing? I mean, you know, you talked earlier about universities, we've talked about accelerators, you know, financial support from the government, you know. Which one of these things have been useful for you as you have been starting? Nayu?
So I guess in terms of financial support, there are a lot of support for deep tech startup. So there are dilutive as well as non-dilutive funding. So for non-dilutive funding, like the grants. So in A-Star, we have the GET grant. And if you have a clinical partner, you can apply for the NHIC grant. And also more recently, the ESG Founders Grant has been increased up to 50,000. So these are the non-dilutive funding that is available. And in terms of dilutive funding, the VC, family office, angel investor, yes. And also in terms of, I guess what is lacking is probably to support people who wants to do a startup, but has got no idea on what to start and doesn't have a team. So that's where I think programs like Antler comes in really, really helpful. Yeah, because it gives a very comprehensive support to these people in terms of, you know, how to start. It's like a startup 101 for people who has not started a business before. So, yeah.
Right. Apoorv?
Right. So like I mentioned, I was working at SUTD. For 1 year, I was in Europe. I was in Barcelona and London for a while. And I was basically working on more research that I know I can be applied, can be commercialized. But also on the side, I was looking for like communities, like startup communities or access to funding and so forth. And I realized the opportunities over there are actually very less. So I literally flew half the way across the world to come back to Singapore because I knew the system here. The threshold for early stage companies is it's like really low over here. Over there, you have to have some revenue, and the access to funding is way harder. So in terms of comparison, I mean, I feel like no matter how much amount of funding there'll be at some place, people will always think it's less. But if you compare to other locations, I feel it's still more developed. It's still developing, but I think it's pretty mature at this stage as well.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, this region is one of the fastest growing regions in the world, right? And there's certainly a lot of money from private investors and institutional investors. I think there's been some, allegations, let's say, that there's not enough money. There's enough money for startups in general, but they typically go after opportunities that go to market faster and not so much for deep tech opportunities that may take a little bit longer to develop the product and go to market. But I think, as Nahyu mentioned, there is alternative sources, in some cases non-dilutive, for these type of startups as well. And I also think that, 15 years ago, there was not many unicorns in this part of the world, right? Then we saw some unicorns coming up, and that's when everybody started throwing their money into VC. And VC is investing a lot more in the last 5 years because everyone was inspired by these unicorns that came up in the B2C space mainly. I think once we're already seeing actually some startups in the deep tech space coming out of Singapore. And I think once these startups become more successful, there will be even more money pouring into this space as there is globally. Maybe, I guess, as a last question, just curious to know a little bit more about your experience with the Antler program. How did it work out for you? What did you gain so far from the program? And what was the whole experience? What would you advise someone who is considering it now? Maybe we start with Apoorv.
Right, sure. So actually, this question has been asked. I've been asked this question quite a lot of times from people who are trying to join Antler and still exploring. But I have a very good answer. Basically, I read somewhere that starting a company is basically like jumping off a cliff or a plane. And to me, Antler is like a giant trampoline at the bottom or like a parachute. So it just makes the jump a lot more safer, and you are not as scared to make the jump. I think for me, it was that. But if I really go into details, I think there are 3 to 4 ways where it helps. So first is definitely, as researchers, we tend to be in circles and bubbles with similar people, but Antler has a cohort of people who are very complementary. So for me, okay, I can build tech, but I didn't have a problem to solve or the network to sell the solution. That's where my co-founder comes in. Secondly, it's obviously, you see 100 more people making the jump with you. So it's also the community. Thirdly, which I didn't expect or I wasn't foreseeing, but it was really from day zero. Actually, Dimitri and Beyond were my coaches from Antler. And day zero, they get on board, try to really poke holes in the idea and the business model, and not only poke holes, they'll actively try to solve those problems, which was very useful, especially for like first-time founders who don't know what they're doing wrong. So they try to keep channel you in the correct path. And fourth, which the obvious one is obviously financially, right? I won't even say anything more about that.
Yeah, good, thanks. Nayu?
Yeah, so I've been with this program for about 6 months, and the experience has been amazing. So I met with so many talented people from diverse backgrounds, and I even forged very close friendship with some of the cohort members. So I think this is a very good way to build on your social capital as well, because as entrepreneur, you always need networks and people around you, and you never know when you need to cash in on them at some point of a time. And I think there's 2 main benefits in joining a program like Accelerator. So first, as what Apoorv have mentioned, it is really to find a co-founder, right? Because within my circles, we are in a very homogeneous sort of like friends or colleagues. So it's really difficult to find people with complementary skills. So as we know that to have a very successful startup, you need different types of people. Basically, the hustler, the hacker, as well as the hipster. So the hacker is the CTO, the hustler is the CEO, and the hipster is somebody who does the design. So it's impossible to get this kind of people within the A-Star community, but joining this program, you meet with so many people, and that really helps. But having said that, it doesn't mean that you really you will find the right co-founder. Because during the boot camps, we can break up and find new people. The experience is really amazing, because when you break up, you really learn, and you know what attributes you're looking for in your next co-founder. And this narrow your hunt, and this is really helpful for me. And the other main benefit in joining the program is really, Antler has a very wide network. So and they can link us up, to investor, which is really, really important. I have people asking me how to raise fund, where to raise fund. And typically when you want to raise a fund, you need a warm introduction. So writing a cold email works, but probably doesn't work as effectively. So Antler is able to come in this space to help, the first time startup, and that's going to be really helpful. So not only to connect us with investors who are a right fit for us, also investors who are not a right fit for us, because we want to practice on those investors before we stick to the one who is the right fit for us. So yeah, I think that's really beneficial, from my view. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much, guys. I just wanted to open up for questions from the audience. We have about 50 people I see online. Punita, are there any questions from the audience? Or if not, then I can keep going and asking more questions. I have more questions in my list to ask Nayu and Apoorv.
Yeah, we have 2 questions so far from the audience. Probably we could give everybody some time, another 2 to 3 minutes for them to type in their questions, and then you could, in that meantime, you can have another questions for Nayu and Apoorv.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So another question would be more around, this path, the entrepreneurial path, is not for everyone, right? Not everyone should take it. And maybe it's not for everyone, and it's not, the timing also needs to be right. So I guess my question is, what type of skill set and what type of personality do you think is, or more motivation should someone have in order to pursue this entrepreneurial path? Maybe we start with Nayu.
So for me, the skill sets or traits is, as mentioned previously, hardworking is important, but this person needs to have a passion in what you're doing, what the business would be about, because this is a very long journey, and once you meet a problem, and if you're not passionate enough, you can give up really, really easily. So passion is important, and perseverance is also very important. So yeah, I look for these 3 key traits, for a successful founder. Yeah.
Agreed. Apoorv?
Right. I think my answer is similar to what she said. Like, you really need to be passionate about what you're doing day to day while building the company. Also, there's like maybe there are some skill sets you definitely learn along the way. You definitely improve a lot on soft skills. because as researchers, we tend to, even if we are publishing papers or going to conferences, we have to, what we are doing, we have to explain to similar people. But over here, we have to explain to people who know nothing about the tech. They don't understand the tech. So I think the ability to explain things very clearly, that's very critical. Apart from that, also I've seen researchers from some researchers or some people who are very like sort of rigid or either not too confident. So when they're working on their idea, let's say they're developing a technology for a few years and then they want to build a company out of it. Sometimes I've seen people not taking feedback too seriously. They're still too rigid about their idea. But also on the other side, there will inevitably be someone who will say, I don't want your product, it doesn't make sense. And at that point, you also need to be really rigid, really confident. No, this perfectly makes sense. And it needs to be a balance between both. So at that point, basically being really honest to yourself, I think is really important.
Yeah, I agree. That flexibility and agility of spirit is certainly very important, I think, as well. Yeah.
Cool. So let's take some questions from the crowd. So there's one question about the program. So Abhishek is asking, some applicants have a mix of domain edge and tech leadership. Is that a disadvantage? And how does one leverage it during the application process as well as during the process of the program? So within the
domain and tech leadership, certainly not a disadvantage, right? This is, again, we're looking for people who have domain, who have tech leadership, and who have business leadership skills. So, if you have two of these, then that's even better. I guess what you need to keep in mind, though, is that you need to find someone who complements you in the program. So, for example, if you have an edge in tech and domain, you probably need a strong business founder, which, there's plenty of them in our programs. It's good to know what you're best at and focus on that, and know your weaknesses, so you find one or two other co-founders who complement you and basically build on these weaknesses that you have.
So there's another one again in terms of the program. It's with respect to how do we assess and improve the entrepreneurial skills, such as passion, execution focus, resilience, and if we do assess these, what's the standard? If we have a standardized methods that we follow to assess these.
Yeah, I guess there's two levels of assessment, right? One is assessing these traits before someone enters the program at the interview stage. And then there's also the assessment during the program itself and before we make an investment, right? So obviously at the interview stage, we do rely a lot on the interviews, and we have interviewed hundreds of people, and then not only just interviewed, but also seen them during the program. So I guess we have built a lot of empirical data, I would say, around, how do you make basically, how do good founders stand out in the interview, and what traits we're looking for. Of course, we do rely a lot on the previous background, the track record of the founder, right? That applies on their CV, let's say, right? I mean, someone who has completed a degree in a top university, someone who has exited another startup, someone who has had a very successful career before, that shows that you must be hardworking, you must be smart. So we do, of course, rely a lot on history of someone. I think during the program, it's much easier to assess, right? Because then it's really all about what do you get done and how fast. So we have at least 2 or 3 months to basically observe people in teams and see how much they can achieve in this time, and how much of this hustle they have, right? To build something, to test it with customers, to iterate. What Apoorv mentioned about, are you flexible enough to pivot and to consider different points of view and different ideas if what you're doing doesn't really work? All these things are things that we do take a close eye on during the program.
Yes. Yeah. So there's another question more from us being a VC, right? So in terms of what are our exit strategies when we invest in companies?
Yeah. So not sure what you mean by exit strategies. If you mean at which stage we exit, it's case by case. So I can't give an one size fits all answer. It is a case by case. I can tell you that we're also building, Antler is building a large multi-million-dollar global fund that will be doing follow-on investments in seed and Series A and Series B. So we're not even talking about exit at this point. It's still too early. We're talking actively though about doubling down on the winners, right? And if we have invested in a strong startup through our programs, then we'll keep investing in this startup in the later rounds through this global fund, and keep supporting this startup to further build their company.
Yeah. So the other question is, what is the age of the oldest participant? So maybe we could share a bit more about the participant profile that we typically see in the program.
Yeah. So first of all, to answer the question, the oldest participant, I think we've had people with. So first of all, we don't measure age. We look at years of experience. I think some of the most senior or experienced people in our cohorts have 20 to 25 years of experience, right? We've had a few of these. In my view, age does not matter in this case, right? I don't want to give you more cliches around. It's really how about you feel and not how much you actually, when you were born. It's really more about the mindset. It's not about the age. And I think to that point, if you look at, besides the myth about the 25-year-old entrepreneur, if you look at the research, and there's been quite a lot of research on this topic, it says that the ideal age to basically start a company is between, like, I think 38 to 42 or something, right? When you're in your 40s, because that's when you have accumulated enough knowledge and experience and social capital that Nayu mentioned earlier. You need to know people as well, and you need to have more experience and knowledge. And typically, these things you do when you're a bit older. So again, age doesn't really play a role. I think we've seen very successful young founders like Apoorv, and we had other way more experienced founders again being very successful.
Yeah. So there are no further questions at the moment. Probably we could have one last note from all of you in terms of what you recommend to aspiring entrepreneurs out there.
Yeah, or what advice you would give someone who's considering to start now?
Yeah, probably start with the panel and then we can go to you.
Sure.
Nayu?
Yeah, so for entrepreneurship is not an easy journey, but it will be really, really rewarding. And this is a journey that is worth going through. And if you have the grit and the passion and you want to create an impact in what you do, so please take on this journey, yeah, and enjoy the ride.
Perfect. Apoorv, what are your thoughts?
Right, likewise, like no matter of like mental preparation can prepare you, so it's gonna be hard for sure. But even just first hint of customer using your product makes it all worth it. And you should do it for exactly the reason written behind Dimitri. It's like you should not regret not trying. You should, whenever you're old, you go back thinking that I at least tried. That's why you should do it, I guess.
Yeah, you stole my thunder. That's what I was also about to say. But no, I think just to add to that, in big decisions in my life, I'm always trying to take the long-term perspective and think about, what should I really do now? Okay, let me look at it from when I'm 70 or 80 years old. Hopefully I'll reach that age. And I think when I'm there, I will definitely have not regretted going into startups and entrepreneurship. And I will definitely regret if I have not done this choice. And I think it's also, you know, again, as entrepreneurs, you shouldn't be taking, let's say, you should be taking calculated risks, right? And I think this is a calculated risk because it's something that you try for a couple of years. And, you know, most of you, I assume, are, I'm sure, very, very qualified people who can always find another job or continue their career from where you left it, right? And not only that, but I think you'll continue your career much wiser and much stronger than you currently are after going through this journey.
Perfect.
Great.
Yeah. No further questions.
So, great. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. I wish you know, we could do this in person and shake some hands, but please do get in touch if you want to know more, and would be happy to meet as many of you as possible. And thank you so much, Nayu and Apoorv. Really appreciate you being around and sharing your experiences.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
And thanks to A Star for hosting this. Really appreciate it.